To today's deep dive. I want you to picture a scenario that might feel a little too familiar.
Oh, yeah, we all have those.
Right. So you are in a conference room, or maybe holding court, on a crucial video call. You have just laid out a brand new, highly researched initiative.
The kind you have been stressing over for weeks.
Exactly. You've anticipated the roadblocks,
Yeah.
your slide deck is flawless, and you deliver the pitch with perfect confidence. And at the end of it all, your manager smiles, nods thoughtfully, and says those magic words.
That's interesting.
The classic response.
You walk out of that meeting feeling like you absolutely nailed it. But then, weeks go by.
And the project doesn't move forward.
Right. Resources aren't allocated. Eventually, you realize the initiative is just completely dead, and you're left wondering how a supposedly successful pitch evaporated into thin air.
It is a profound disconnect between the words spoken and the actual business outcome. You operated under the assumption that you had a green light, while the person across the table had quietly installed a brick wall. That dynamic is the exact focus of our deep dive today. We are exploring the dangerous, hidden language of the modern workplace.
It's essentially a completely different dialect.
Yeah, we are looking at office English, a dialect that sounds incredibly polite, encouraging, and collaborative on the surface, but frequently conceals a completely different and often negative reality.
And to really get into this, we are pulling from a fascinating stack of sources today.
We've got recent organizational psychology journals, Harvard Business Review articles on corporate linguistics, and several cross-cultural communication studies. They all break down what people in professional environments say versus what they actually mean.
Because the linguistic environment of the modern office is incredibly complex. For anyone navigating this space, especially if English is not your first language, the gap between the literal dictionary translation of these phrases and their functional everyday meaning can severely impact your career trajectory.
So our mission for this deep dive is to equip you with the translation skills required to decode this language in real time. We're going to deconstruct the psychology behind these phrases and offer actionable strategies to disarm them.
Which is so needed because this language is a minefield.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, let's unpack this, starting with the scenario we opened with. The phrase, that's interesting. Most of us know by now that this isn't a ringing endorsement, but the mechanics of why it's the weapon of choice are genuinely surprising.
Well, if we look at the literal definition of the word interesting, it implies curiosity and engagement. It suggests that the topic has captured the listener's attention.
Which sounds great.
Right. Therefore, the human brain, which constantly looks for positive reinforcement, naturally categorizes that's interesting as a win.
I was reading through one of the communication studies we pulled, and it highlights that interesting is the ultimate non-committal filler.
It really is.
It satisfies the social contract of responding to a presentation without the speaker committing a single actual resource to the idea.
It is the pinnacle of forced neutrality. In the context of office English, that's interesting, is engineered to buy time.
To basically hit pause on the conversation.
Exactly. The organizational psychology journals we reviewed indicate that managers frequently deploy this phrase when they experience a sudden need for conflict avoidance.
Because they don't want to say no right to your face.
Right. They don't agree with you, or they are entirely unconvinced by your argument, but they lack the immediate desire or maybe the data to dismantle your pitch in that exact moment.
So they give you a verbal placeholder. It sounds like a compliment, but it functions as a pause button.
What's fascinating here is that genuine approval in English workplaces sounds much clearer. It doesn't use ambiguous adjectives.
It's way more direct.
Yes, when leadership actually loves an idea and wants to champion it, they shift immediately from passive observation to active verbs. They will say things like, "That's a great idea," or "Let's move forward with this."
Or even, "This is exactly what we need. Draft a timeline by Thursday."
Right. True approval involves immediate forward momentum. Interesting is static.
So knowing that it's a static placeholder, the strategy for you, the listener, has to shift. When you hear that's interesting, you cannot let the ambiguity stand.
You have to push back a little.
But the sources recommend forcing the issue in a specific way. I wonder how you do that without sounding defensive or overly aggressive to a manager who is clearly trying to avoid conflict.
The key is to leverage their politeness right back at them to your advantage. You meet their neutral statement with a collaborative, open-ended question that gently forces them to reveal their hand.
So you don't say something like, "Why don't you like it?"
Definitely not. Instead, you ask, "What concerns do you see with this approach?"
Or something like, "Would you suggest adjusting anything to make this align better with our goals?"
Exactly. By framing it that way, you were giving them psychological permission to share the negative feedback they were trying to suppress.
And you do it without turning the conference room into a battleground.
You are shifting the dynamic from a monologue to a genuine dialogue. You acknowledge that yellow light and actively invite the constructive friction that is necessary for any real project to survive.
Now, that aversion to giving a direct, clear no doesn't just happen during formal pitches either. It completely infects how we handle regular professional requests.
This is where it gets really painful.
Yeah, this brings us to a category of phrases that function as the soft rejection. The heavy hitters here are, "We'll think about it," and "That might be difficult."
Those phrases carry a significant amount of weight, particularly because of the context in which they are usually deployed.
Think about the vulnerability involved when you typically hear these words. You are sitting in an annual review asking for a promotion. You are proposing a budget increase for your under-resourced department. Or you are simply asking for a more flexible remote work schedule.
Everyday things that really matter to your quality of life.
Right. You make a clear, justified request, and the response is a slow intake of breath followed by, "Well, think about it."
It is such a deflating experience, but analyzing the intense diplomacy behind these phrases reveals a lot about the cultural premium placed on politeness over clarity in many Western corporate spaces.
Because no one wants to be the bad guy.
Right. Well, think about it is functionally a polite delay that almost universally means probably no.
And what about, "That might be difficult"?
Similarly, that might be difficult is a highly indirect mechanism for saying, that's not going to happen.
The sociological research we reviewed points out that this behavior is rooted in a Western corporate version of saving face. Direct language, especially a flat denial like, "No, you aren't getting a promotion," feels incredibly socially abrasive.
It feels like a confrontation.
Exactly. The research suggests managers use these soft rejections to regulate their own discomfort in the moment. They're prioritizing a smooth interaction over giving you the clarity you actually need.
They are attempting to soften the blow, essentially painting a closed door to look like it is slightly ajar.
Which is so dangerous.
The danger is that the employee takes the phrase literally. If you believe your manager is actively thinking about your promotion, you might spend the next 6 months waiting for an answer that was already finalized the second you left the room.
That creates a massive asymmetry in expectations. To navigate this, the Harvard Business Review pieces we analyzed offer a fantastic tactic to turn these vague, soft rejections into actionable data points.
It's all about nailing down the specifics.
Right. When you are hit with a, "Well, think about it," or "That might be difficult," you need to immediately establish a timeline or a metric. You ask, "When would be a good time to revisit this?"
It is a highly effective countermeasure. If the manager truly just needs to consult with HR or run the numbers, they will gladly provide a timeline.
They'll say, "Let's connect next Tuesday."
Exactly. But if it was a soft rejection designed to end the conversation, you are forcing them to admit that there is no future date on the calendar.
You can also ask, "What would need to happen for this to move forward?" I find that one incredibly revealing.
Oh, it really puts them on the spot.
It does. If they say a budget increase might be difficult, asking what needs to happen forces them to either build you a roadmap, like hitting a specific sales target, or it forces them to finally admit that the budget simply does not exist.
You are respectfully demanding clarity in a culture that heavily defaults to vagueness. It is about holding boundaries and refusing to live in professional limbo.
Which transitions perfectly into how this culture of vagueness handles ongoing tasks. When colleagues can't comfortably say no to an idea, they frequently just send it to purgatory.
The graveyard of priorities.
Let's talk about that graveyard featuring the most infamous corporate catchphrase of our era. Let's circle back.
The phrase "circle back" is ubiquitous. It appears in countless email threads, Slack messages, and meeting wrap-ups, but we have to look at the power dynamics at play when it is utilized.
Our sources discuss this in terms of corporate power pacing. The person who initiates the circle back is essentially confiscating the momentum of your idea.
That is a precise way to frame it. While there are rare, genuine instances where circling back means gathering more data before a future discussion, it is predominantly used as a polite stalling tactic.
It translates to, "I don't want to talk about this right now."
Or, "This is not a priority." It allows someone to shut down a conversation entirely without ever having to engage with the substance of your point.
And it creates the illusion of action. It sounds like work is being planned, but nothing is actually happening. The psychology journals touch on the cognitive load this creates. It triggers the Zeigarnik effect.
Which is the psychological tendency to remember interrupted or incomplete tasks better than completed ones.
So you, the listener, are carrying the mental weight of this unclosed loop, while the person who suggested circling back has already erased it from their memory.
Because they had no intention of ever returning to it. The phrase was an escape hatch, not a calendar invite. If left alone, the idea quietly dies and disappears forever.
Therefore, the actionable advice here requires you to take total ownership of the timeline. If the topic actually matters to your workflow or your project's success, you must be the one to force the follow-up.
You cannot wait for them.
Do not wait for them to circle back because they won't. You send a message later that afternoon. Better yet, you put it directly on the calendar with an agenda attached to officially circle back. You have to hold them to their own polite stall.
If you do not actively chase down the idea, it ceases to exist. That is the fundamental rule of the circle back. You must formalize the ambiguous promise.
Now, when stalling fails and projects actually get reviewed, we move into a category of communication that relies heavily on coded feedback. Here's where it gets really interesting. We're looking at the phrase, not bad.
Two very small words that carry an immense amount of cultural and linguistic baggage.
The complexity of not bad highlights the severe limitations of purely text-based communication in the workplace. In many cultures globally, if you present a report and your manager says, not bad, that is fundamentally a negative critique.
It implies the work lacked excellence.
Yeah, that it merely managed to avoid being a total disaster. But in office English, not bad can actually mean pretty good. The variable here isn't the vocabulary, it's the delivery.
English corporate communication relies heavily on the performance of the words. The source material points out that tone and facial expressions are the actual message, while the words themselves are secondary.
So the context is everything.
Yes. If a colleague reviews your data set, raises their eyebrows, nods enthusiastically, and says, "Hey, not bad," that is a significant win. They are genuinely impressed.
The audio and visual data completely overwrite the literal definition of the words. But if they just stare at the screen expressionless and mumble a flat, not bad, you are in trouble.
In that instance, it truly means the work is barely average. It met the minimum viable requirements to not be rejected.
This reliance on unspoken cues creates a massive barrier.
It does. For neurodivergent individuals who might process tonal shifts differently, or for non-native speakers, the transcript of the meeting is functionally useless. You have to analyze the subtext to survive.
Which brings us to the most dangerous phrase in the coded feedback category. I want you to mentally brace yourself when you hear this one, because it operates like a legal disclaimer before a verbal car crash.
The incoming storm.
The phrase is, with all due respect.
That phrase should immediately trigger your professional threat response. It sounds incredibly polite. It sounds deferential, like an acknowledgement of your expertise.
But in practice,
it is strictly used to introduce strong criticism or disagreement.
it is the ultimate cushion before impact. Our sources describe how phrases like this actually trigger the brain's amygdala, despite the polite vocabulary. When someone starts a sentence with, "Well, all due respect," I don't think that strategy will work. The first 5 words are just an attempt to adhere to professional norms.
While delivering a direct attack in the second half, this raises an important question of why use the cushion at all.
Right. Why not just disagree?
It functions as a mechanism to grant the speaker permission to violate the established rules of corporate politeness. By explicitly stating they are being respectful, they absolve themselves of the harshness of the critique that follows. It is a rhetorical shield.
So when you hear, "with all due respect," you need to mentally pivot from a collaborative mindset to a defensive one. You are about to be challenged, and you need to be prepared to calmly and logically defend your position with data.
Exactly. You cannot be disarmed by the politeness of the introduction. You must focus entirely on the critique that follows the comma.
So what does this all mean? When we look at the entire architecture of this language, the weaponized neutrality of, that's interesting, the delayed rejection of, well, think about it, the corporate power pacing of, and circle back, and the coded warnings of, with all due respect, why do office workers construct these elaborate linguistic mazes? Why not just say what we mean?
The research we've unpacked today synthesizes this into 2 core evolutionary drivers of the modern workplace: professionalism and relationship management.
It's all about keeping the peace.
Precisely. In an ecosystem where you are required to collaborate with the same individuals daily, often under high-stress conditions, and in open plan or highly integrated digital environments, bluntness is perceived as a liability. People soften their language to maintain harmony.
Direct negative language risks damaging the fragile interpersonal networks that keep the business functioning. It's essentially a survival mechanism. They are constantly trying to sand down the rough edges of daily conflict so that everyone can continue to work together the next day without lingering animosity.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this constant softening creates a major barrier. This relentless dedication to harmony over clarity puts anyone outside the dominant cultural loop at a profound disadvantage.
Because they miss the hidden, less than positive meaning.
Right. If you come from a culture where professional communication is highly literal and direct, entering an English-speaking corporate space feels like playing a game where the rules are intentionally hidden.
You hear polite words, and you assume you were succeeding. You expend tremendous mental energy just trying to translate the cultural intent behind a simple email. It is an invisible tax on your daily productivity.
Which is why understanding these translation frameworks is so vital to your professional longevity.
To ensure you are fully equipped for your next meeting, let's summarize the ultimate playbook for navigating office English. First, you must listen for tone and observe body language, not just the words. The performance of the words is often the true message. The transcript alone will mislead you.
That is crucial.
Second, utilize clarifying questions. When you are met with vague, polite resistance, politely force the issue. Ask what specific concerns exist or what specific milestones need to be hit. Do not accept ambiguity.
Always push for clarity.
Third, never assume that positive-sounding words automatically mean approval. True approval utilizes active verbs and immediate resource allocation. And finally, follow up in writing. If someone promises to circle back, you must be the one to send the calendar invite and formalize the timeline.
Those strategies will drastically reduce the friction you experience. But direct to you, the listener, beyond the tactics, there is a critical mindset shift you need to adopt.
And what's that?
Do not take it personally. When you inevitably realize that a colleague was soft-rejecting you or using a stalling tactic, it is easy to feel deceived or frustrated. You must remember that this indirect language is a systemic cultural quirk. It is not a reflection of your competence, your worth, or the quality of your ideas.
It's just the environment.
It is simply the established dialect of the environment. Master the dialect and you neutralize its power over you.
Once you understand the subtext, you stop feeling confused and start seeing the actual mechanics of how your workplace operates. It is incredibly empowering. It fundamentally changes how you interact with your colleagues and your leadership.
It really does. But as we wrap up our analysis of this hidden language, I want to leave you with one final thought to ponder the next time you find yourself decoding a polite, vague email. We've spent this deep dive exploring how all this indirect communication evolved to protect workplace relationships, maintain harmony, and avoid the discomfort of confrontation.
It's all built on keeping things running smoothly.
But it makes you wonder, if everyone has to spend so much mental energy decoding what their colleagues actually mean, does this polite corporate speak ultimately create more workplace anxiety and paranoia than just being bluntly honest in the first place?